First of all, I should say that I am delighted to be here. It is a real privilege to have been here twice within 1 year. And I owe a great deal of gratitude to your two professors for having invited me, from whom I've learned so much. And in fact, after our presentations, they're going to teach me a little more about Tétouan by taking us to two Marabout tombs and to Darbrisha to deepen our knowledge of Tétouan. So it's with a full heart that I say I am very happy to be back. Now, you may be a bit alarmed by the title of today's lecture, Urban History, a Challenge with an exclamation point, which is your gift to the title. Because in fact, it is connected to a project that I guess you're going to be invited to undertake, which is to choose a city and construct a guided visit to the city that other Moroccans or foreigners could take in order to share your knowledge and your attachment to that place. It's a wonderful project, and I'll explain to you how I've become involved in exactly that kind of work after I define the purpose, which is, how do we make history popularly accessible? You are graduate students, and you have just heard a very high-level, sophisticated historical presentation. Not everybody has the energy or background to hear and absorb a presentation like the one you've just heard. But those people deserve to know, to have historical knowledge, to know about the past of a place. The question is, how do we reach them, draw them in, engage them? The question is, how do you make history popularly accessible? Oddly enough, I first became an urban guide in, you will not believe this, Casablanca. In 2014, I worked in Casablanca for Casa Mémoire, and I became a guide during the Journée du Patrimoine that happened every spring. I was a guide to the Ancienne Medina. I guess I fell in love with guiding visitors to a city that was not my own, but that I am very fond of. I guess you don't hear people saying that very often, but I am fond of Casablanca. I'm also fond of Boston, the city where I live and work. In the entirety of this year, I have been learning the history of Boston with a certain ferocity and joy so that I can share it with people. The title of the tour that I give is Black Voices. And it is a guide to the writers who lived in my neighborhood, which is called Beacon Hill, at the very center of Boston. Why Black Voices? Because the movement to abolish slavery in the United States was based in my neighborhood in the 19th century. And the progenitors of this movement were not white Bostonians, they were African American Bostonians whose voices we need to listen to and whose voices are not heard as often as they ought to be. When I start my tour, I ask people, and this again, I'm talking less about the content, though I hope you find it interesting, than I am interested in sharing tips for how to construct a tour that is both engaging and accurate and fun, if I can even use that word, fun. So I begin the tour by saying to my tourees, what monument do you like most in Boston? People love answering questions like that. They will say the Bunker Hill Monument or the statues on Commonwealth Mall, of which this is one. And I'll say, well, that's very interesting because the voices you're going to be hearing during our tour today don't have monuments in their honor. Their monuments lie in their writings, in their books, in their articles, but they don't have statues like this. Now, the man whose statue I've put here was a very famous Bostonian, because he is seen popularly to be the creator of the abolitionist movement in Boston. He was a newspaper editor, he was a newspaper publisher of a newspaper that came out every Friday called The Liberator. And it was full of the news that he believed people needed to learn in order to oppose the continuation of slavery from 1831 onward. So I read his newspaper, and I'm struck by his warmth, by his sense of humor, and when I hear stories about attempts that were made to punish him for his opposition to slavery, I realize he was also a brave man. He has a statue in his honor, but he's not the only person who ought to be honored. So let me move on and introduce you not to an image, because I don't know what this man looked like. I'm going to introduce you not even to his house, because it was torn down, but to the place in Boston where he lived. The man was called David Walker. David Walker, and I'm going to have to control myself so I don't tell you too much about these people, who I find endlessly fascinating, but David Walker was an African-American man born free in Wilmington, North Carolina. He came to the North, settled in Boston, and he wrote a pamphlet that is as radical as Malcolm X's writings in the 20th century. I'm going to show you some of his words in a minute so that you can hear how a man in 1829, 2 years before The Liberator began to be published, was making demands for freedom and respect that sound absolutely modern to our ears. Because in this pamphlet, well, let's have a voice from the audience. Would someone volunteer to read what's on that page? Someone with good vision? How about you? Loud.
I can only see two words. Appeal.
Okay, Walker's appeal in 4 articles, together with preamble to the colored citizens of the world, but in particular, and very expressively to those of the United States of America, written in Boston, state of Massachusetts, September, I can't make up.
Don't worry, we won't quibble.
3rd and last edition with additional notes, corrections.
Okay, yeah. Thanks so much. Okay, what words jump out at you from that title that seem kind of significant, heavy, with meaning?
Colored citizens of the world.
Wonderful. He's not talking about, he's talking about the planet. That colored people are equal to any other citizen on this planet. He's writing that in 1829, before there's even an abolitionist movement. So let's see what he said. Could we have someone with even better vision, because it's bigger print? Okay.
Throw away your fears and prejudices then, and enlighten us and treat us like men. And we will like you more than we do now, hate you, and tell us no more about colonization. For America is as much our country as it is yours. Treat us like men, and there is no danger, but we will all live in peace and happiness together.
Thank you so much. What words jump out of this?
We will all live in peace and happiness.
Okay.
Treat us like men. So treat us equal.
Okay, it's full. It's full.
Colonization, I think is a very strong word.
Which one?
Colonization.
Ah, yes. Well, what that is an explicit reference to is the idea that was floating then to have African Americans return to Africa and live in West Africa, particularly what became Liberia. In other words, and he's saying, I'm American. I'm staying here. So that's what lies behind that word.
We will like you more than we do now hate you.
Mm-hmm.
By you,
Yeah.
is he addressing white people?
Yep.
Okay, I would say hate you.
Now, that word hate is the one that caused me to type this up. And I read it to my tourees, and I ask them, what do you think of this? 1829. The man was brilliant. I've read the pamphlet. In the pamphlet, he says, don't abolish slavery gradually, abolish it immediately. He says Christian churches are full of hypocrites if they are segregating and denying the shared humanity of all of us. So he attacks the church for hypocrisy. He attacks reformers as opposed to abolitionists. He's also critical of black people who don't treat other black people well. The man is Malcolm X, 1829. And you know what is the shame? I never heard of him before this year. He doesn't have a monument. And so when I gave this tour the first time and I asked the people I was guiding, what do you think about this tour? They said something very beautiful to me, which I think is important to keep in mind when you give your tours. As long as we're talking about them, they haven't died. So they may not have a monument in stone, in brass. But if I am talking to you in 2025 in Tetuan about David Walker, he's not dead. So, I'm going to skip women in the room. I'm skipping the woman I talk about, not for any other reason than to be short in time. But she's there, I assure you. This is the African Meeting House, which is the site of many, many abolitionist meetings. It's 5 minutes from where I live. It was built early in the 19th century, but when the abolitionist movement started, it became a gathering place for people decrying, condemning, organizing to get rid of slavery. And this is a picture. So in other words, we're moving now. We're moving through the streets. And when I am in front of the African Meeting House, I show people the masthead of the Liberator. That is the abolitionist weekly newspaper. Let's do some different kind of reading now. What imagery there jumps out to you as significant, as interesting?
It looks biblical. There's a Jesus in the middle of that Jesus.
And what do you think the publisher's trying to say? Yes?
That slavers born to be slavers?
Say that again?
Slavers, or the black people born as slavers, not as something else.
Slaves. You
Slaves,
mean,
yes.
Okay, it's obviously Jesus Christ in the middle, and he has a slave looking toward Christ for salvation because Christ would have freed the slaves.
They are all equal in the eyes of God.
Yes.
call for emancipation?
Yeah. It's so interesting, you know, you're reading the words more than the images, because that's the way we're trained.
Yeah.
But back row?
The picture is separated into two parts. There is a part like pre-freedom and...
Yeah, okay, so this is now, that's our future.
I see somehow hypocrisy, where we have here a religious figure of Jesus, and the others are worshiping him or something like this, and in the background we have slavery and we have evil. So this is kind of a hypocrisy, a religious hypocrisy.
Well, the man on the right who's kind of going like this, he's the hypocrite. Because Christ has said something that he doesn't like. And he probably considers himself a Christian. Okay, yes?
There is two families, the black family and the white. They all live happily because even if they are divided, it's like whenever you are black or white, you will live happily because God is willing to make you happy.
Yes, in addition, I think that's probably a slave market.
Yeah, on the left.
On the left.
Yeah.
And then this is a happy family that's free of slavery. Okay, that's the newspaper that was published after David Walker's pamphlet by a man, the man who happened to be in the first statue, who said he was converted away from wanting gradual abolition of slavery by David Walker, who said no, now. So I turn around with the African Meeting House at my back, and now me and my tourists, I don't like that word, but I can't think of a better one, are looking at this house. Because in that house, there were two lodgers, two renters of rooms, around the same time, the 1830s. I'm going to tell you about only one of them, William Wells Brown. But if we were in Boston, I would love to give you this tour if you come to Boston. But we're not, so I'm going to cut it down. William Wells Brown was born in slavery, never went to school, freed himself at the age of 20, and he became an extraordinary proselytizer or preacher of freedom, not only in the US, but also in Europe. He was a performance artist in a way. He would sing on the stage. He would pretend he was speaking to his former enslaver on the stage. And he wrote books, he wrote plays. When he traveled in Europe, that's where my next quote comes from. Who would read it for us? Yes, thank you.
No sooner was I in British soil than I was recognized as a man and an equal. The very dogs in the street appeared conscious of my manhood. No one laughed at me in France.
Reaction?
That means that French actually see black people as, they are like equal to dogs. So.
Okay.
That came after the French Revolution that changed a lot about our ideas about slavery and human rights and so on.
Okay, these are both very good points, but I have to confess that when I read that sentence, I want to burst into tears. Because what the man is saying is, I am laughed at, I am ridiculed in the United States because I look like slaves. I was a slave until I was 20, but I'm tired of being ridiculed. And somehow I think that dimension of slavery, the fact that it eats into the peace with which you walk down the street, comes home when you read the writings of these people. Remember, the title of the tour is Black Voices. So what I say doesn't matter. What they say is what my job is to present to the tourists. Then I take the people down an alley, and I like it because a lot of people don't know that there are sort of Medina-like streets on Beacon Hill. And then when we emerge on the other side, we are looking at the home of a man called Charles Sumner, who was beaten almost to death on the floor of the US Senate in the 1850s because he was arguing against slavery. And a Southern congressman beat him with a cane so that he had to go away for 3 years to recover. I suppose today we would say he had PTSD. So that is the homestead of Charles Sumner that you look at when you emerge from the tunnel that was very close to the African meeting house and the boarding house across the street. Now, there is a statue, not only in Boston, but in Harvard Square to Charles Sumner. I do not want, during my tour, to belittle the contribution made by white men or women. That's not the point. The point is to add to those voices the people who don't have statues in their honor, who have been ignored. Now, this house is on my street. It's a block and a half from where I have lived for a while. It's the Lewis Hayden house. And it was occupied by and then owned by a man who was born in slavery in Kentucky, who freed himself by moving with his wife and son to the north, where he could vote in Boston. And he used that home as a refuge for people who had escaped slavery from in the South. You may have heard the expression Underground Railroad. Well, this is one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. And so I stand in front of that house and I tell people about the owner, which is Lewis Hayden. And I think that is a beautiful portrait of a dignified man. Think back to what William Wells Brown said. No one laughed at me in France. No one's going to laugh at him. He was a dedicated activist in Boston. And in his house, he welcomed a couple once. Who do you think we're looking at? This couple of people. What do you read from the image? They came together. You assume they're
Friends.
They were enslaved.
he was enslaved and
Wife, is she a woman?
you
Yeah.
tell me.
I think, yeah. Husband and wife?
Oh, you're too smart. You are really, really too smart. I wanted you to say, well, of course, it's a white man and his slave, because that's how they got out of Georgia. They got on a train. She pretended to be a white man because she looked white, though she was a slave. And she didn't know how to read and write. Hold on, and you'll see a picture of what she looks like when she's not dressed as a man. She covered her arm so that she wouldn't be asked to sign because she didn't know how to read or write. And she also he said he was sick. And so the slave did most of the talking for them. That's how they got to Boston, where she took off the men's costume because they were free in Boston, and she and her husband, now I can say she, their names were Ellen and William Kraft, began touring New England and then eventually Europe, telling the story of their escape from slavery in the South. They stayed on my street. the fact that when I go past that house, I'm walking on the same ground as Ellen and William Craft, Harriet Tubman, John Brown, you may not know all these names, Frederick Douglass. I live in the epicenter of the abolitionist movement of the 19th century, and it's thrilling. Now, on this street, there was a church. It was called the 12th Baptist Church. It was torn down and it became a school. The 12th Baptist Church, parenthetically, is the church that Martin Luther King joined when he moved to Boston to study for his doctorate at my university, Boston University. But that was, of course, a century later. This is where there was a church that black people came to on Emancipation Day, January 1st, 1863, to celebrate the first act of emancipation of American slaves. Did I know before this year that I live a block and a half from where Frederick Douglass was present? This is one of the most famous African Americans, one of the famous Americans who ever lived. He wrote 3 memoirs, which I heartily encourage you to read. And he was a public speaker of great fame. I'm going to ask someone to read these words that come from his expression of what it felt like to be in that church on Emancipation Day. Yes?
And soon that church was packed from doors to pulpits, and this meeting did not break up till near the dawn of day. It was one of the most thrilling occasions I ever witnessed, and a worthy celebration of the first step on the part of the nation in its departure from the thraldom of ages.
Okay, what word jumps out at you from this quote from Frederick Douglass?
Church.
Okay. There is no wrong answer. I just want to know what you think. Yes?
This was the first step on the part of the nation.
Okay. The word first is the one. And remember, as I said, there are no right or wrong answers. But what does the word first convey to you?
The beginning towards the new.
It's not here yet. And it's still not here in the United States in 2025, which I'm saying to you because I'm going to be blunt with you that I have a political agenda when I'm speaking to people in Boston. I don't speak politically in Boston. Why? Because if you tell people what to think, they won't. But if you lead them to make their own conclusion, you might win them over. So I think the word first is crucial to get people who you're guiding to say, first, that means it's just the beginning, as you say. Now, then I take people to a little park that is right across the street from my front door. And we sit down and I ask them what they think about, would they like to give the tour a different title? What kind of monument do they think the voices I've quoted deserve? In other words, you want to get your tourees talking because then they're going to incorporate into their minds and beings what you've said. Because if you end up speaking, they won't. They'll just say, well, that's what she said. So I want to show you a few images that are not on my tour because they carry through the theme of monuments, which is in a way one of the themes that frame my talk, as you can tell from the beginning. What does this monument say to you? It's Abraham Lincoln
And some slave.
and a slave. again, what does it make you feel? What is the, how would you read this image?
I read it as like if Abraham is granting freedom to the slave.
Okay, and how does that strike you? Lincoln is granting freedom.
He actually was fighting for the freedom of, he was fighting for the freedom of slaves.
Yeah, it's not to deny that he became abolitionist. It's not to deny that he was fighting to keep the Union together instead of splitting into two countries.
But you can still feel discrimination there. That's
It's the same pose as on the Liberator, of the slave looking up.
Yeah.
So do you know what, can anyone guess where this statue is now? Anyone? It's not there. Because that statue doesn't work in the 21st century. That statue is in contradiction to the ethos of my tour, Black Voices, the originators of the abolitionist movement. Now, this is what is there now. And I think those are two Moroccan women who happen to be sitting. There are a lot of Moroccans in Boston, by the way. You probably have relatives there.
So
But
we're looking at the same place?
that fountain has replaced Lincoln and the slave. But I think you will be interested maybe in my last image, which is of a statue that's just gone up this year. And this is, before I show you the statue, probably this, you can't read this. Is there anyone with super sharp eyes?
No, it's clear.
Can you do it?
Yeah. In 2017, King's Chapel embarked on a difficult yet essential journey to confront our church's history of slavery and racial injustice. At the heart of this legacy are at least 219 children, women, and men who were enslaved by past ministers and members of the congregation.
Okay, you can stop there. Okay. So, that's what we have. It went up in August, just a few months ago. And this is what the statue looks like. What is your reaction to this statue? Yes?
It looks like the black woman frees the bird from the cage.
Yeah, yeah.
And the bird is actually the black one.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful.
Well, the birds in the cage represents freedom, and the black woman
Yeah.
has, for example,
Yeah.
symbolic of freedom in her hand.
Yes. And she's worked hard, you can tell. She's not a young person.
Maybe the bird symbolizes the woman, and the cage symbolizes the suit, the white suit, probably refers to the white man, probably. Because there is a contrast between black and white.
Yeah, yeah.
So she's free, but she's wearing white.
Well, it's actually bronze, but yes. I mean, but I think the reference of purity, it may be possible to make there. That's my last image, and I'd like to conclude by actually summing up the tips that I tried to embody and employ in my tour, in the hope that maybe they'll be useful to you when you make your own tours. So, if it's not of interest, don't worry. Of course, you're not my student, so I'm not going to give you an exam, which I'm sure you're very happy about. Number one, read everything you can about the place you choose so that you don't accept on faith only one perspective. And if you're speaking to someone and the human is your source, not a text, speak to lots of people. Yeah. Don't rely only on your grandparents. I loved my grandparents, but the tendency of grandparents to idealize their youth is really strong. We love them, but they're not always the best sources. You want other sources as well. Number 2, study the buildings. Look long and hard at the buildings. Ask people what they see. People like to say what they see. So, 3, what I do, because my tour is called Black Voices, is that I've had photographs made and then I've made them on rigid laminated sheets, so that when I am quoting someone, I show Frederick Douglass's face, I show William Wells Brown's face, because they don't have monuments. And they should not be forgotten. Leave time at the end so that people can ask questions and tell you what they've learned. And finally, open with a core concept. Define your objective, if only to yourself. And if you notice, I used the motif of monuments as a way of kind of encapsulating a big period of time and different movements, but to try to give some thematic coherence to basically a century and many different individuals. Thank you. And now we're going to have someone do something similar vis-a-vis another beautiful city that I'm fond of, which is Tangier. Karim Benzakour, a friend of mine since 2007.
Before I start, what I will say is that Mr. Baroun called me professor. I'm not a professor. I have nothing to do with academics. My friend Karim Benzakour used 2 words that were passion and amateur. I'm a passionate guy about the history of the city where I live. I've lived in Tangier for about 40 years now. And I'm a big amateur. After I retired 4 years ago, I needed to do something to keep myself busy. And thank God there was something that I love, which is, it is okay? I think it's, oh yeah. You fix it while I'm talking. And it's history. So about 4 years ago, and then Diana also came out more or less at the same time in Tangier. And the 2 of us were meeting and taking tours of the Medina. And I had friends who said to me, Karim, why don't you take us to see the Medina? You always talk about it. And so gradually I started building this hobby and passion about studying the city of Tangier, which, as you may know, has an amazing history that goes back to 3,000 years ago. And so I started reading and studying. I gave a lecture at the American Legation. I gave another one last week. And I started doing something that I love, which is giving tours of the Medina and doing exactly what Diana was saying. So this is kind of a practical study of what she's been talking about, which is building a tour of the Medina of Tangier. Now, the Medina of Tangier, most of you must know it, but it's big. I mean, big enough to spend hours and hours touring. So the challenge, and so you talk about a challenge. It was challenging for me to see how to come up with a short tour that would be interesting for people to participate in, and of course not to be too long and too technical and use the right words. And so I've been working on that for a few years now. I'm going to show you 2 specific famous sites in the Medina of Tangier that I've worked on and want to present to you. Rue Seyyaghin. Most of you know the Medina of Tangier, right? Okay. And Souq al-Dakhil, the famous Plaza Soco Chico. And so you all know La Place du 9 Avril, but no one calls it La Place du 9 Avril, by the way. If you ask any Tanjawi, he'll say Souq al-Barra or Grand Soco because of, especially Spanish, Soco Grande. But anyway, this is known as Souq al-Barra. And so after this, I stand here, by the way. I always start my tour here to show people where the Medina is and to show them something that you've been talking about, which is this. Wenceslas Holler. Now, I have the same thing printed as Diana said. And Souk Barra is on the right here, right? That fort that you see is actually Bab Fas, and has disappeared. And so this is very good for people to visualize how Tangier looked in the 17th century, that it was very small, within walls. It was a garrison. It was essentially for military people. And so people get and you can see the soldiers and all of that. So people get a sense of what Tangier looked like 3-4 centuries ago. And from there, we start our tour, and I take them immediately inside the Medina, and it starts by Rue Seyyaghin. It's actually the first street you find. There's a small portion called Samarin, but everybody talks about Rue Seyyaghin, which is this one, and you must know it. It goes down towards Souk al-Dakhel. So this is where I start my tour. So my first stop is at the Grand Soko, but then when I enter, I make a stop right at the beginning of the street to tell a story. People love stories. It is something I discovered recently, and actually it impressed me so much because I didn't know this existed, is that in the summer of 1935, there was a Jewish guy who owned a little building right at the entrance of the Medina, 1 floor high, and he wanted to raise it. So he got construction workers, they started digging. 8 meters below ground, they found a Roman statue, 2 meters high. Now this is very impressive. We talk about 2 meters high statue, impeccable. There was only one hand missing. They found it later. And so for me, this was just great news. It means that when you're in the Medina of Tangier and you're walking through the streets, you're walking on 3,000 years of history. People don't know that. Now, Tangier goes back 3,000 Phoenicians. The Romans showed up much later. But the Medina of Tangier, I once made this comment that it's the most ancient still inhabited city in Morocco. That's quite a claim. And I was telling my friend they should use it for marketing purposes for the city of Tangier. No other city in Morocco has an older history than the city of Tangier, but still inhabited, right? I mean, we had Lixus, we had other places as old, but Tangier remained. So this very city has underground buried so many treasures that the archaeologists know they cannot go and dig under there because people are still living in the city of Tangier. So Romans were in Tangier. We heard that, we read that, but one thing is to hear and read. Another thing is when you visualize something. So right there, they had this big statue, meaning they had probably something else around. Now, archaeologists have come up with the very solid theory that Tangier, since it was Roman, must have had what they call a decumanus maximus road. In Roman urban planning, if you've done some Roman history, volubilis, if you've been to Wylie, it has it. There's a main axis, there's a big street, goes always east to west. In the middle there would be a forum, and not far a temple. Tangier has exactly that. Archaeologists have shown with aerial view, Rue Seyyaghin is the decumanus maximus road of Tangier. The forum is the Souk al-Dakhel, the Soko Chico, all right? And so, so from here, what I do is we're on the street, and I start walking down, and I tell people the history of the street. Now, this street has an amazing history that has changed over time. We saw about the Romans, but when the Portuguese were there for 2 centuries, now my friend Karim Benzakour talked about the British 23 years, but the Portuguese stayed over 2 centuries in Tangier. Many people don't know that. This was called Rua Larga, which means in Portuguese, you can understand, it's close to Spanish, the wide street. Why? Because it was a garrison. It was meant for soldiers and troops to move. So it was the Rua Larga. The British kept it, in fact, as wide. And so, so it was called Rua Larga. When the British took over Tangier, it became Catherine Street. Why Catherine? Caterina of Braganza, you heard the story. So Catherine Street. That fort that I showed you on the previous photograph was Fort Catherine. By the entrance of the Medina, it's gone now. And so, but over time, that street will change its names. Zanqa Dakhiliya, La Grande Rue, Main Road, Main Street, Rue Principale, until finally, towards the 19th century, it did become a Rue Seyyaghin because of the Jews who settled there and were professing the job of goldsmith. So Seyyaghin, goldsmith, silversmith, okay? But this street also has an amazing history in terms of what happened on the street over time. One major act that I like to mention, we talked about Sidi Muhammad bin Abdullah Muhammad III, 18th century. Now this Sultan made a huge, took a huge decision in the mid-18th century by deciding that Tangier was to become the diplomatic capital of Morocco. They didn't use that word diplomatic capital, but he kind of forced all the foreign diplomatic missions that were essentially in Tétouan, some in Tangier, but also Salé, Rabat, and Mogador. Mogador was important. He sent them all to Tangier. He said, you have to go to Tangier, and he forced them. The last one was the French towards the end of the century. Why? Because he wanted them to be together, and for that purpose also he named a Naib Sultan. That's where the Mandub comes from. And so he had his foreign mission diplomats in Tangier, and he could interact with them through the Mandub and not have them scattered around the country. There were other reasons too, anyway. And so this act actually had a huge impact on the future of Tangier in general, and Rue Seyyaghin in particular. Why? Because since they were forced to move back to Tangier, they all chose the main street. Tangier was not a big city, there was nothing. So they chose the main street, Rue Seyyaghin, and so you had the French legation, you had the Swedish legation, you had other, well, not legations to be correct, because the word legation would come later. There were consulates, and so they would be around that on the street. The Dar Niyaba, which still exists, it's a museum, was on the street, and so yeah, so the street, and so in time we started having, we can see here just before, no, actually the building on the left, 3 stories high, that was built by a Jewish family, and it became the first department stores in Morocco in 1917. Tangier was the first city to have a telephone lines in Morocco in 1883. It was on Rue Seyyaghin. Tangier was the first city in Morocco to have electricity before any other city in Morocco. It was on Rue Seyyaghin that Rue Seyyaghin was actually one of the main streets to be electrified. The first bank in Morocco, 1844. It was just off a street from Rue Seyyaghin. So you see that Rue Seyyaghin had an important role throughout history by having all, and businesses and banks and all of this. So we're walking down, and then I showed them the side streets, by the way, because as you walk down this Rue Seyyaghin, we have at the top of it, where I stood and talked about the statue, on the left, we have a street that still the Tanjawis nowadays called Aqba Frances. Now Aqba Frances goes back to the 19th century when the French moved their consulate from Seyyaghin to the street. And Tanjawi at the time said Aqba Frances. Why? Because the legation was there. Nowadays, if you ask any Tanjawi, old Tanjawi, Rue Mansour, he won't answer you. But if you say, where's Aqba Frances? Immediately he knows what it is. So that's also interesting to see that the names have not changed in time, and they often reflect what's happening on that street. The next street to the right, going down, is Rue Synagogue. Interesting to know that Rue Synagogue had more than half a dozen synagogues. In Tangier, there were more synagogues than anything else. Of course, the synagogues were very small. We have a big mosque, but we have many small synagogues. And so it's also kind of the entrance. There's some guys who nowadays still say, this is the entrance to the Millah. And it's wrong, because Tangier is one of the only, it's not the only city. I thought it was the only city. I think the other one is either Mazagan or Mogador, but that didn't have a millah. People lived, Muslims and Christians and Jews lived together. But it's true that on this part of the city, there were a lot of Jewish houses, synagogues. And so we continue walking down towards Souq al-Dakhil. We saw a statue. This is what Rue Seyyaghin looked like in the late 19th century. We can see on the left the electric cables. There was electricity. And it's funny when you read about this, by the way, because electricity would happen from certain hour to certain hour, and it's not like nowadays, right? This is a few decades later, same street, and you see the Spanish church, which is there right now. Anyway, you see the evolution. You see Tabacos. This is when Tangier was starting to being mixed with, before international zone, by the way. The international zone is 1923, but before we already had a lot of Spaniards moved to Tangier, and we get to Souq al-Dakhel, Petit Soko, Souq al-Dakhel, and this is a square that you all know, I suppose, and this is how it looks today. And here again, I would use one of Holler's. Now, Holler really visited Tangier. This guy is very interesting because his drawings are accurate depictions of Tangier back at that time. And on this view, Al-Qasba is up there. Peterborough Tower, you were talking about Peterborough Tower, that's the tower you can see, number 2. But in the middle here, if you can see, there's number 4, the marketplace. That's Souq al-Dakhel. And this is interesting, to me at least, that for 2,000 years, it hasn't changed. Seyyaghin with the marketplace, with Souq al-Dakhel, often people would, just remove buildings and change the roads and streets. For some reason, it hasn't changed. And this is how it looked, Jamal Kbir. This is how it looked 19th century. This is the same place. But you can see, okay. And then I have another one, just to show you the evolution of the square. Now, Souq al-Dakhel, just like Rue Seyyaghin, has an amazing history over time. Essentially, again, because of Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah decision to move the diplomatic missions to Tangier, this square became the center of Tangier. Now, around this place, in the late 19th century, imagine this, we had legations, French, Portuguese, Italian. We had 4 post offices. Tangier had 5 with the Moroccan, but around this square, you see Café des Postes? We had the French post office, we had the English post office, we had the German post office. German is right there to the left. And we had the Spanish post office. And we had cafes. You'd think you're in Europe. Au Grand Paris was a fancy shop. We had banks. We had hotels. We had a casino. There was a casino there. So this place was really the heart of Tangier, and voila. So I usually stand here and I do, so talking about what Diana was saying, to tell stories. I've been trying, so this has been the challenge for me, right, over this last years, is to find every time, you talked about doing lots of reading. I do lots of reading because every time I would find something new that I can add, because I don't know everything, and there's so much to know. And I would, what would be the best story to tell people? Anyway, 2 stories I'll tell you about that happened in Souq al-Dakhel. One go back to the Roman time. And I discovered this recently. Again, I thought it was very interesting. The Romans were in Tangier, and there was a centurion, a soldier, right, Roman, Marcellus. Now, Marcellus was Roman, but became Christian, right? He converted to Christianity, and one day he was supposed to participate in celebrations for a Roman emperor, and he refused because he was Christian. He wouldn't participate in these pagan celebrations. And what happened? He got executed. He was martyred, and most probably in this place, because this was the forum. When you read about Roman history, the forum was meant for those things. So I suppose he was killed in this place. What's interesting about the church, made him a saint, and he became Saint Marcellus. Now, Saint Marcellus, centuries later, his relics were sent to Leon in Spain. And if you go to Leon right now, there's a place called Plaza San Marcelo, and there's a church, La Iglesia San Marcelo, and supposedly the relics of this guy is there. And he's a Tanjawi. I mean, he was Roman, but he was based in Tangier. And so if you ever visit Leon, be aware that there's a place called San Marcelo, and San Marcelo was here in Tangier as a Roman. This is a photograph that I found. This is a church in Rabat, a beautiful church in the center of Rabat that you can visit. And it has this beautiful stained glass that you find in churches. And this is San Marcelo, supposed to be Saint Marcellus, and Saint Cassian, another Roman actually, who was also martyred. Anyway, this is in Rabat. So this is one story. The second story, it's much more recent, and so I can just move in time. It's 1936, 1939. It was the Spanish Civil War. In Spain, the Civil War had 2 groups that were fighting one another. The pro-Franco, Franco was in Tetuan, the Phalangists, nationalists, and the Republicans, who were actually at that time leading the country. And so Tangier happens to be the city at that time were the biggest foreign community was the Spaniard. The Spanish were outnumbering any other nationality in Tangier. So Tangier was very Spanish in a way. And so you had the two groups in Tangier too. You had the Phalangists and you had the Republicans. And the Phalangists called the Republicans Rojos because a lot of them were communists. So in Tangier they were fighting all the time when the civil war started. In Souk Dakhel in 1936 in November, one more fight broke out, but this one was a big one, and it made the headlines of many newspapers. Why? Because in Souk Dakhel, I showed you, we have cafes. Café Central would be here. Café Fuentes would be just over there. I mean, the distance is very close. Fuentes, they still exist, these cafes, was the Republican cafe. Café Central was the nationalist. At the same time, every afternoon, they would meet there. One Spanish newspaper, because there were many Spanish newspapers in Tangier, said about Soco Chico, es la caldera tangerina donde todo se cuece. It's the Tangier cauldron, everything gets cooked. You know, Tangier in 1936 was already a big city. You had boulevards, you have buildings everywhere, you have many new neighborhoods, but everybody had to go to Soco Chico to meet and to get the news and see what's happening. And so this fight broke out between these two groups one night, and what happened is that there were some Italian seamen. Now Italy was also fascist at that time, and the Italian seamen joined the fight, and a huge fight took place in Soco Chico, and then with injuries, no one dead, but injuries, the cafes were destroyed. And there's a beautiful, I love this is a newspaper in Italy in November 1936. And this is just a drawing of a journal of an artist, but this is supposed to be Souk Dakhel. You see the Italian seamen fighting with the Republicans, and you see cafe and binos and stuff like that. So, voila. To end, so to conclude, I will say it is a challenging exercise, but when you, I mean, in my case, just like what Karim was saying, when you're passionate about something and you love it, for me, it's been keeping me busy for 4 years now, and I haven't stopped, and I will not stop, because it's like, we talked about digging 8 meters below. We don't know what's under the ground of Tangier. It's the same thing for these stories. The more you dig, the more you find. The more you find, the more stories you can tell. And every time you change the source, you talk about sources, very important. If you go read the French sources, you get one version. You read the Spanish version, sources, another version, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
My question is for you, Diana. You mentioned that Abraham Lincoln's statue was removed, right? I believe that Abraham Lincoln played a pivotal role in freeing the slaves. Isn't this a humiliation for him when they took off the statue?
The removal was to give a different perspective on African American initiative. That kneeling man is the problem, not Lincoln.
The image.
You see, it really is not an anti-Lincoln gesture at all. And to be honest, I don't know anyone who interpreted it that way. I think everyone realized that our ideas have changed. Because interestingly enough, that statue was put there based on the donations of African Americans in the 19th century. That image worked in the 19th century. In the 21st century, it doesn't.
Thank you very much, Professor Diana, for your insightful lecture, and also for Mr. Karim. My question, Mr. Benzakour, is to which extent can we trust oral testimonies when we are trying to trace back stories for the sake of storytelling? Because you mentioned that storytelling is very engaging, and we can feel it when you were telling us those stories. So to which extent can we really trust our grandmothers, grandfathers, and in general people who sometimes romanticize the past in some way, as mentioned also by Professor Diane? Thank you so much.
No, you're totally right. I mean, Diana spoke about this. I think also Karim spoke about this, the sources. In history, so I'm an amateur, but I've really, in the last 4 years, not like people call me a historian. I'm not, but I love to work in the right way. And I'm trying to teach myself, and she's been a very good mentor, by the way. So when I tell a story, but my story is based on something I've read. I never make up stories. I never say my grandfather said. So these stories actually have been published. And that's very important. So that's a very good point. I mean, Saint Marcellus, how much truth there is in that story, I can't tell. However, it's been, published and written about, and people just like that story. So that's one of them. The other ones are much more easier. But you're totally right. If you tell an oral story, you can do it, by the way, but you have to say it in advance. Because people, especially, in Tangier, but Titwan, the same thing, we've heard and we heard, and this one told me, and that one, people love that. But then you have to be very careful, and if you mention it, why not? Then you say, this is what people say, but this is not history. This is just what, either a legend, and sometimes those stories can be very interesting to tell, by the way. So, Laura.
Interacting with your excellent presentations, both of you, very informative. Actually, opening new horizons of how we can do something similar in context of Titwan, which is a very ancient city. But in the context of Tangier, given the fact that it was frequented by numerous travelers, and that all of them left records of their journeys, but many of them left records and detailed accounts, sometimes of daily events. And because of the curiosity, they would observe, things that we normally don't even pay attention to. That is so interesting. And I mentioned Ali Bey the other day, but Ali Bey is such a source that and he spent several weeks, not to say months, I would love to include both, the architect.
Even one sentence about Ali Bey, I'm sorry, because...
Ali Bey, some of my students, we did cover Ali Bey at some point. Anybody from last year?
Yeah, many from last year.
Did we do Ali Bey? Okay. Now, he's a great traveler, Orientalist, and a mysterious figure. We don't know a lot about him because he didn't reveal everything about him. But, just highlights. He came to Tangier, quickly managed to infiltrate into the high society in Tangier, and then he happened to meet the Sultan.
But in Spanish, his real name, that's important.
Yes.
Because somebody who doesn't know Ali Bey.
Yeah.
Ali Bey is a Spanish guy, Domingo Bloody, I forgot his name. But, okay.
A long name.
And he...
Very. And so he infiltrated into the high society, meets the Sultan. The Sultan, in the same story told by someone, just in the context of Morocco, he put his... what is it?
Globe?
Silham, and that's a gesture that you are my protege. No one will come close to you. That he loves him so much that he almost adopts him. He's a scientist. He's a scholar. He's a figure of enlightenment. Okay, so he comes to Morocco and then finds a way into all parts of Morocco. He's collecting information. The Sultan gives him something that is unique. He gives him a house in Jamalfna, and then he gives him a whole farm, and then keeps pressing him to get married. But for some reason, he hesitates and he declines. And I think at some point they begin to recognize that probably he's not what he pretends to be. So he ends up coming back to Laraich, and in Laraich, he is completely, surprised by the treatment of the governor of Laraich. Eventually, he flees. No, he thought like he got his permission, etc., but they allowed him to go without anything. Okay, just get on boat and get away. And finally, he died. He was killed. He was assassinated, poisoned, something like that, in Syria. And one of the stories is like the Sultan's pilgrims kept going after him. But there are all these stories about Ali Bey. So Ali Bey was in Tangier, and he wrote a wonderful book about Morocco, including a section or a chapter on Tangier. Sorry, I have taken too long.
No, it's excellent. And sorry, this reminds me that I was trying to shorten my talk, but I wanted to mention, I had in mind to mention that Tangier has seen so many people visit over time. I mean, you have writers, Alexandre Dumas, Pierre Loti, Mark Twain was in Tangier. The one who Anderson has, Anderson who did the stories for the children was in Tangier. Of course, you have the more recent Paul Bowles and the Beat Generation, but we had painters, Delacroix, Matisse, Tapiro. We had emperors and kings. Fernando I, king of Portugal, marched through Seyyaghin, Rua Larga, where going to Wad al-Makhazin, 1578. He marched on that. The Kaiser, the Emperor of the German Emperor, 1905, William II, marched, and that you have photographed because it's more recent. So all these people that visited, it's fascinating. And when you start reading about these separate events, and so you mentioned Ali Bey. I did a presentation last week. I just want to add this because my friend Khalid down there was talking about sources, where you get your sources. I did a presentation, and I want to share this with you quickly. I won't be too long. About my visits to Nantes. I went twice to the French diplomatic archives in Nantes and once to La Courneuve near Paris. These are the official French diplomatic archives. Amazing, among the best in Europe. And I was just so surprised that I could so easily go there. I have to register. And I was telling Khalid, we shared this, Diana knows about this. But suddenly you have in your hands papers that are 150 years old that no one has ever touched maybe. And you can see the yellowish color, the rusty needle. And it talks about the Raisuli, original letters signed by sultans. And so the archives are open to anyone. You just have to be passionate, of course, and just make the move. And you go, and you never know what you can find there. But yeah, I wanted to share this also with you guys. So,
I'm beginning to fear that you are going to think that we are missionaries, missionaries of the historical profession, that we came here to convert you all. But that really isn't true.